Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Domestic and Family Violence Response Training webinar. My name is Alison Alari. I'm the Injury Prevention Officer here at Injury Matters, and we might get going with the webinar today. So I'd like to welcome you all for coming along. So before I get started, I would just like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands and waters throughout Western Australia and pay respects to the elders past, present and emerging. So a little bit of housekeeping before we get going. Can everyone please ensure that their microphone is muted and your microphone is muted, and also we have delegated some times for questions. So if you see the chat function on your GoToWebinar, you can send the questions through on there. So we've put some time aside in the middle of the presentation as well at the end. So if you send them through to me, I'll be asked to ask them to our presenters on your behalf. And also, if you have more than one person in the room with you listening to today's webinar, can you please send us a quick private message via the chat tab as well to let us know how many people are listening in with you. So just before I do pass you over to Lifeline, a little bit about Injury Matters. We are for safer people and places. Injury Matters aims to prevent and reduce the impact of injury within the Western Australian community. So we do this through advocating and providing education for injury prevention, as well as providing support for those affected by injury. So today's webinar is brought to you through our No Injury program with the support of the Department of Health WA. No Injury is a statewide program which aims to enhance the capacity of injury prevention practitioners and safety promotion practitioners and organisations to deliver quality injury prevention activities. So No Injury provides training, resources and networking activities. So in doing this, we work with a variety of stakeholders and across the community and government settings using the three key elements of the Know, Learn, Connect. So Know is about building your knowledge around injury topics, and that can include using things like our fact sheets and resources. Learn is about increasing your skill set and learning how to adopt a public health approach to injury prevention. That's done through our trainings and events. And Connect is about connecting with other professionals working in the injury prevention space. And you can do this through our Injury Prevention Network as well as the Connected program. So violence against women is a widespread problem in Australia. Data for people experiencing family and domestic violence can sometimes be challenging to capture due to underreporting due to the victim not recognising the act to be violence, fear that reporting violence will perpetrate extreme violence, the victim believing that they can deal with it themselves, or even the victim not believing it justifies police time. However, what we do know, in Australia, 1 in 6 women and 1 in 16 men have experienced at least one incidence of violence by a partner. In WA in 2018, there were 37 homicides related to family and domestic violence. Everyone has an important role to play in preventing violence. As individuals and communities, it is possible to shift the way we think about and behave concerning gender and violence. Together, we can work to shift social norms, change institutional practices, and influence attitudes that contribute to violence. So with that in mind, I would now like to pass you over to Casey Metcalf, Marion Hopkins, Lisa Jones, and Laura Fitzgerald from Lifeline, who is going to be talking about and presenting to you today on their DV-alert program. So I'll pass you over. Just bear with me for 1 second. So I'm just passing you over to Casey. You should be able to see her slides, and I'll just bring up the other presenters as well. Hi, Laura, can you hear me?
I can indeed. You can hear me?
Yes, great. Let me just unmute the other two as well. There's just a long list of names here. Sorry, 1 second. All right, Marion.
I'm happy to get started while you do that.
Yeah, Marion should be good to go as well. And Lisa, is that all four of you?
Yes, Marion's unmuted.
Yeah, and Laura as well.
Yep.
Sorry, let me
And Lisa's still muted, I think.
Oh, is she? Let me just check what's going on there. Casey, can you hear us? No? Okay, let me pull up yours as well. There we go. Lisa, are you good now?
Yes, thank you.
Great. And just trying to find Casey. 1 second. Ah, there she is. Casey, are you?
Yeah, I'm here.
You got your microphone as well? Perfect. All right, thanks.
Okay, thank you so much for doing that. And thank you everyone for your patience, the wonderful world of webinars that we're in now. So yeah, we'll get started. Thank you first of all to Injury Matters for hosting the session. We are delighted to be here and talk to you today about our DV-alert program. One thing we'll do from the beginning, and I'll be quite brief because I know you've done this already, Alison, is we would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land we're meeting on today. For me, that's the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, and we'd like to acknowledge their connection to this land and pay our respects to elders past, present, and emerging. Another thing we always acknowledge at the beginning of any training we do, and today is no exception, I'd like to acknowledge any lived experience of domestic and family violence among our participants today, and that may be through direct experience or through having loved ones subjected to domestic and family violence. Okay, so as you've heard, we have several members of our training team to speak with you today. My name is Laura, and I'm one of the trainers at Lifeline WA. And joining me are Lisa, our training manager. You can hear us, Lisa? Oh, she may still be
Good morning,
muted.
all. Yeah, no, I've got to remember to unmute myself. Good morning, all. Thanks for joining us today.
And the lovely Marion, who's another one of our trainers.
Hello there.
And we also have Casey, who is our who will be kind of helping us in the background. So Casey's here too.
Hi, everyone.
All right. So I'm sure when you hear or see the word Lifeline, you do think of our flagship service, and that's our 13 11 14 crisis telephone support line. Suicide prevention and crisis support are fundamental to what we do at Lifeline. And Lifeline also has a crisis chat service and a text line, along with 13 Help, which is a new dedicated bushfire response phone line. Here at Lifeline WA, we deliver additional services. So one of those is free counselling and support for separated mums and dads. We realised that there are a number of service providers attending today, so we wanted to highlight to you that this is a service which is available to any parent experiencing issues around separation anywhere in WA. And in response to COVID, our counsellors are conducting sessions via telephone or video call. We also offer free grief and bereavement counselling. We have a community visitors scheme, which is helping to improve the social and mental well-being of lonely and isolated older people in our community. And we have DB Teen, which runs mental well-being skills for groups of young people and families. And then we have our training team, which is us, and we deliver training on topics such as suicide prevention, mental health, and of course, domestic and family violence. So today we're going to be covering the DV-alert program, which is the training we deliver. Then we will consider what domestic and family violence is, what it can look like, with particular attention given to the effect of COVID-19. We'll then consider how we as members of the community can help, what signs to look out for, what to say, and where we could refer someone who is experiencing violence. We'll take time for questions at several points during the presentation, as Alison said, and then again at the end. So the DV-alert program. Since 2007, Lifeline has been delivering DV-alert across Australia. And at Lifeline WA, we deliver the program throughout this state, including regional and remote areas. The program is funded by the Department of Social Services, and it is a key initiative under the national plan to reduce violence against women and their children. And so you will hear a focus from us this morning around women and children. It is also a unit of competency, and so that means that participants who successfully complete the training and assessment will receive a statement of attainment at the end. The program is designed to help community frontline workers recognise the signs of domestic and family violence, respond with appropriate care, and refer women and their children subjected to or at risk of domestic and family violence to appropriate support services. So the model that you can see on your screen there, that forms the basis of the DV-alert workshops, along with assessing risk, planning for client safety, and self-care. The program recognises that community frontline workers are often in a unique position to notice the signs of domestic and family violence, or they may be the only person a woman trusts to disclose her situation to. The worker's response in this situation is critical, and they can play a vital role in helping the woman to keep safe and in linking her up to appropriate support. So for that reason, there is some eligibility criteria around who can attend our two-day workshops. They are open to any person who provides direct service and support to the community, either as a volunteer or part of their employment. Or if you're a student and you're on placement, that can be another way to become eligible for the training as well. So the sectors that you see on the screen, these are included in as being eligible, but it's not an exhaustive list. So anyone who works in health or allied health, community, education, childcare, or those in a frontline capacity supporting the community. There are a few different types of our DV-alert workshops. So we do deliver free awareness sessions as well, and they're open to anyone in the community to attend. And we regularly run these for the public. Sometimes community groups will host a session as well. A popular awareness session we run that you can see there on the screen is called Brothers Standing Tall. That's a 2-hour interactive presentation on family violence, specifically for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander men, and that's delivered by a man from Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander background. There are e-learning workshops, that middle column, and Lisa's going to speak more about those later on. And then we have our 2-day courses, and we have several options in there. So you can see there's general, Indigenous, multicultural, settlement, and working with women with disabilities. So to give you a bit of an idea what's involved in these courses, we'll just start with the general DV-alert. So this is our original workshop, and that comprehensively covers the following topics that you can see there. So we consider ourselves within the work that we do. We talk about the nature and scope of domestic and family violence and the patterns and dynamics that can be involved. We look at the impact on the person. We look at considering diversity, which I'll speak more about later, interventions, and then also on the second part of our course, we look at communication skills, impact on children, and our own safety and self-care, along with safety planning for clients and making referrals. So every single stream of DV-alert covers these topics, but then the emphasis changes slightly because we recognize that domestic and family violence can look different in different contexts. So we do have our Indigenous workshop, And when we run these, we always partner with a trainer who is Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander, and we partner here with the Indigenous Consulting Group, or ICG. It's worth noting as well that whenever we go to a new community to deliver this workshop, we go through a process of community consultation where we look at what the needs of that community are, when would be a suitable time for us to come, and getting permission before we do come onto those lands and deliver the workshop. With the multicultural workshop, we also partner with a subject matter expert. So here in WA, we partner with Diversity Focus. And here there is an additional emphasis on the role of culture and on cultural safety when we're working with clients. We also have a settlement services workshop, again, partnering with Diversity Focus, and this one considers the needs of humanitarian entrants or refugee communities when considering domestic and family violence. And finally, we have a Working with Women with Disabilities workshop. And again, we partner with a subject matter expert in the area of disability. And we look at both domestic and family violence and disability and how those two things can intersect and the effect that might have on a client. So that's a broad overview of the types of training that we do offer. And now I'm going to hand over to Lisa, who's going to talk about the learnings that we've had from delivering this across the state.
Thanks, Laura. So Lifeline WA, we've been delivering DV-alert around WA since 2014. In the last financial year, that looked like 63 workshops of all those various streams that Laura went through. And in the current financial year would have been 68. We delivered 48 programs so far before COVID came along. So some of the recent locations that we've delivered our two-day workshops in have been those there on the slide, as well as Albany, Bunbury, Broome, Kalgoorlie, Northam and Merredin. Recently, we did conduct community engagement for Indigenous workshops in Esperance and Newman, with those workshops on hold until we can return to safely deliver those. Some of the challenges and successes. So a major current challenge for us is that we did need to postpone all workshops, face-to-face workshops. And they are in progress of being converted to some online delivery options, and there is e-learning, which we'll talk more about towards the end of the presentation. Ensuring that people know about our workshops and who they're designed for and how they can be of use. Timing for the community, so knowing what's going on and when is a good time for us to come. So it really does help where we can have some key contacts in that town. And as you know, our state is a very large state, so there's a lot of geographical area to cover and to get to, and to be able to return with some consistency to locations as well. So some of the successes have come where we can build that consistency, like delivering Brothers Standing Tall in Broome. We were able to go back about every 6 months, and most recently 22 men attended, including support workers who were working on an ongoing basis with those men to really continue that conversation. It's worked so well when we are partnering with organisations such as Desert Blue Connect in Geraldton, who've hosted several workshops at their location there, promoted them to the community, and having the training take place, you know, at that service aids knowledge and networking, and we've also been able to then return regularly to full workshops. And, you know, the networking that happens even within smaller towns, bringing a group of community frontline workers together. So here's some participant feedback now. So these are a couple of participants from Brothers Standing Tall saying that what they really liked about the workshop was having a space to talk without shame and to know more about family violence, understanding what it's about and what can be changed for the better. And some example feedback from our two-day courses here. So we often do find that it increases people's confidence to respond, and people become more aware of some of the barriers that someone might face when they're thinking of leaving or when they're experiencing violence. We also asked for commitments to action from the training, and a couple of recent examples are, one participant said they were going to go back to their DV screening form at work and really understand it, and to look at how it could be applied in a way in line with some of the things that they'd learned in the workshop. And people often say that they're going to go back to their workplace and share the learnings or encourage the training for other staff, for example, so we can have quality conversations and best practice at work. And it's really what participants take back to their workplaces after a course that can further increase the safety of women and their children. So in summary, you know, 3 key things that we'd say that we've learned delivering this program. One really is it is about facilitation. We are not coming in as experts in domestic and family violence. We're experts in the Recognise, Respond and Refer program and the DV-alert course. So it's the magic that happens in bringing participants together, the learnings that they share with each other, and what they bring to the course as well. We're always humbled by the commitment of frontline workers, and this is really brought to light in more regional locations where people are working together to achieve some really amazing things. And in those workshops, the section on self-care often creates some really important conversations there. Things around, say, the boundaries between work and personal life that can be really difficult to maintain in smaller towns. So there are some really big issues and challenges in this space, and it can feel overwhelming at times, but this course really brings us back to what participants can influence the most, which is their personal response, how they respond one-on-one to someone experiencing violence, and the importance of our attitudes and values and how they come into play. There was an independent evaluation of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander stream and Brothers Standing Tall by Circa. A couple of the key findings were that having Indigenous trainers co-deliver the training was viewed as a highly effective way of ensuring the content was delivered in a culturally appropriate way. Non-Indigenous participants reported positive shifts in their level of cultural awareness and competency, saying that it had allowed them to acknowledge the limitations and flaws in previously held views, to be more open-minded and better prepared to respond appropriately. Evaluation evidence also indicated behaviour change, with many participants able to share examples of what they'd put what they had learned in the training, being able to put that into action by speaking out against domestic and family violence, using tools they had learned with their clients, and sharing learnings with other staff. There were some recommendations that came out of the evaluation, and our partner trainers at ICG are currently working with Lifeline Australia on implementing those. So we might see if there are any questions about the DV-alert program now before we move into defining domestic and family violence and talking more about our further topics.
Hi, thanks for that. Thanks for the overview of the programs. It's really, I guess, exciting to see, I guess, the few different programs that you have available across WA. I haven't had any questions come through yet. Just a reminder to everyone out there, if you do have any questions, send them through and we can ask them on your behalf. But yeah, there's none at the moment.
No problem. All right. So Laura will continue from here.
Okay, thank you, Lisa. What we're going to do now is we're going to have a bit of a look at the types of things we talk about in our workshops to give you a general idea. So there are many different definitions of domestic and family violence, but when we discuss it in our workshops, what we're talking about is any intimate or family relationship where there is an imbalance of power and control, where one person is using coercion, threats, and/or abusive behavior to instill fear in another person in order to maintain that power and control. It's a complex pattern of behavior, which we look at in more detail. And while there are some aspects of domestic and family violence that are universal, it can look different in different situations. So for instance, in the Disabilities DV-alert workshop, we spend time considering the carer relationship, particularly in a group home setting, and how domestic and family violence can occur there. In our Indigenous stream, for instance, we explore kinship structures within some Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities. And what we focus on is how the frontline worker needs to take these kinds of factors into account when assisting a woman subjected to domestic and family violence, so that they keep an open mind and avoid making any assumptions really about their client. A big message in all of our workshops is the need to respect diversity of experience when it comes to domestic and family violence. If we don't do this, it can negatively impact our ability to recognize the signs, respond appropriately, and refer that person to the right people or organizations. We also devote time to exploring the various myths that persist in the community around domestic and family violence, because it can be a bit of a contentious issue. And there are many opportunities in the workshop for participants to be able to reflect on their own assumptions. We discuss something called unconscious bias, which some of you listening may have heard of. But to illustrate what we're talking about, I want you to take some time and read and consider this question. A father and his son are in a car accident. The father dies at the scene and the son is rushed to the hospital. At the hospital, the surgeon looks at the boy and says, "I can't operate on this boy. He is my son." Why is that? So I'll give you a bit of time to consider that. So I'll go quiet for a second so you can have a think. And then after that, I'll put you out of your misery and let you know what the answer is. Okay, so some of you might have heard this before, but for those of you who haven't, the answer is the surgeon is the mother. Now, some of you may have realized this, but what often happens in our workshops, and may have happened for some of you at home, is that when we picture a surgeon, we automatically picture a man, and therefore we don't automatically come up with this answer that the surgeon could have been the mother. So I remember the first time I got told this and asked this question, and I came up with all sorts of scenarios that might have answered the question without thinking about the fact that the surgeon could be the mother. And I consciously believe that women can do anything they want and would make excellent surgeons, but it's just not where my mind went to when I was considering the question. Basically, as human beings, we are all hardwired to take mental shortcuts, especially if we're busy or we're stressed. And we do this in many different ways, and that includes making snap judgments about people. It doesn't mean we are judgmental people. It just means we are people. So we spend time thinking about this and how we can avoid acting on those judgments, since this can create barriers for the person subjected to violence being able to disclose what is happening to them. One classic example of a snap judgment is the question, "Why doesn't she just leave?" This is a common question asked in the community when domestic and family violence comes up. I think really when someone is on the outside of this situation, it can seem as though leaving the relationship is the obvious solution to the problem. In our workshops, and this includes our general community workshops, we spend time unpacking this question, as we know that the reality is far from straightforward for most women. So what I'll do now is I'll hand over to Marion to explore this question a bit further.
Thank you, Laura. So the reality is that separation is not a straightforward option. A woman leaving an abusive partner may face uncertainty about where she can go, how to pay to keep a roof over her head and her children's head if she has them. She may worry about what the father will do when he has the children and she's not there to protect them post-separation, or feel guilt at the thought of denying children access to their father. A crucial question faced by women is whether it is safe to leave. We know that the most dangerous time in domestic and family violence is when a woman is planning to leave, is actually leaving, or has just left her abuser. The reality is that the situation can escalate dramatically at this time, and so we recognise this time as a high-risk indicator. One way of looking at this issue is summed up very well by Jess Hill, an award-winning investigative journalist who has authored a book called See What You Made Me Do. She writes about visiting workers at a family violence helpline in Victoria and hearing how often women will call repeatedly asking for help with the same abusive man. In a discussion with one of the helpline counsellors, she said, "You must get so frustrated when you think a woman's ready to leave and then she decides to go back." The counsellor pointedly replied to her, "No, I'm frustrated that even though he promised to stop, he chose to abuse her again." Why doesn't she just leave is not the question to be asking. Leaving an abusive relationship is not a simple matter. There are many factors that must be weighed carefully because only the person using violence truly can stop the violence. We're just going to pop to some statistics there. So some people in the community underestimate how common domestic and family violence is. To get some idea on the prevalence in community, here's a quick look at just two statistics. Every week in Australia, at least one woman is killed by a current or former partner. 1 in 4 Australian women have experienced physical or sexual violence by an intimate partner since the age of 15. So just having a look at when we're in our workshops, our sessions, we talk about 9 categories of violence. So the difference between using the word violence as opposed to abuse is to understand that this is a violation of another person's human rights. Everyone has the right to remain free from violence or the threat of violence. Regardless of any terminology we use, there is never an excuse for violence under any circumstances. The person perpetrating family violence is responsible for their abusive and violent behaviour. Victims, survivors and children are never responsible. We're going to go through each category individually and 2 categories in a bit more detail. The first category we usually talk about in our workshops the first one is physical. So physical violence or abuse, and this can be actual or threatened, causing pain, injury and or fear, and could be a single incident or a series of incidents. Examples: hitting, punching, slapping a person, causing pain to a person or an animal, or even damaging objects such as doors and walls in the house. One of the physical behaviours we talk about in our training sessions is strangulation or choking. This is what we refer to as a high-risk indicator, and we go into this in more detail in the workshop as it's considered extremely dangerous. Controlling what a person eats or withholding medication would fall into this category. Physical violence at its worst might even be murder. The next category we usually talk about is sexual violence or abuse, and this would include an actual act or a threat, and would include sexual assault, such as rape, or forcing a person into sexual activities which they don't want to participate in, and could also include the sexual abuse of children. It could be a single incident or a series of incidents, and would include sexual harassment. Some other examples are withholding of sex, controlling contraception, pornography, and risky behaviours. Another category we often talk about is emotional or psychological violence. This is involving manipulative behaviour to coerce, control or harm the other person. This can be overt or covert. Thinking of one of the terms which we often hear and talk about in our training is gaslighting, which is playing mind games with somebody and convincing them that they are losing their mind or going mad. An example would be moving somebody's keys from where a person left them and convincing the person that they couldn't have left them there in the first place. This makes the victim doubt themselves and their reality. Another term you might have heard of is Jekyll and Hyde, where a person goes from nice to horrible or vice versa, creating the walking on eggshells feeling. Eroding somebody's self-esteem by criticising them all the time is another example. One final use of emotional abuse could be an abuser threatening suicide if the person leaves them, ensuring the victim is trapped. Another category we talk about is financial violence. So totally controlling of financial resources without the person's consent and often without the person's knowledge. Some examples of this would be putting debt into their name without consent, withholding money, putting assets in one name, rationing money, gambling joint money, getting the other person into debt with such things as credit cards or loans. It could include restricting the person from working to ensure they don't have their own financial dependence. Another category is cultural and spiritual. Laura, can I just get you to chat about that one?
Yeah, no problem. So this form of abuse can take place in many different ways. It can involve stopping a person from engaging in their religious beliefs or maintaining a connection to their culture or community. You can imagine, since a person's faith or their connection to culture can be a huge source of strength and comfort for any person, the impact of having this removed can be devastating. This kind of abuse could also involve forcing a person to assimilate to their abuser's culture or religion, or deliberately using culture or religion as a justification for abuse. So one example would be quoting passages from the Bible that appear to condone violence.
Thank you, Laura. Another category is verbal abuse. So this could happen in private or in public, including technology such as social media, and it's designed to humiliate, degrade, demean, or intimidate, and may include threats of physical violence, insulting and putting down a person, finding fault in them, sarcasm, and name calling would also be included. Shouting and yelling at a person or whispering threats are other examples, and also using the silent treatment and choosing when to talk to a person. Another of our categories is stalking. So harassing or threatening a person, especially in a way that haunts the person physically or emotionally in a repetitive and devious manner. Stalking of an intimate partner can take place during the relationship with intense monitoring of the partner's activities, or stalking can take place after a partner has left the relationship. Stalking or monitoring, whether it's actual or virtual, like following a person through their phone or watching them on camera, is often a sign of serious abusive behaviour and should be acted on immediately when reported. A woman who is being stalked is likely to also be at risk of physical harm. Because of the serious impact stalking can have on a person, it is a criminal offence and can include a prison sentence given to an offender. An example of stalking would be watching which house a person enters and discreetly leaving flowers at the door. This seems like a lovely caring act, but the underlying menacing message is, I know where you are and I can come here anytime. One of the categories which we want to go into in more detail is social abuse. It can be through forced isolation, and an example is when one person stops another person from being in physical contact with family or friends, or even talking on the phone with them, ensuring they get no support from people who may want to help them. In addition to this isolation, they may not be allowed to get a job, as that would mean they may make friends at work and have relationships with people the perpetrator can't control. It could be that they are made to move away from people who care about them, not allowed to drive, hence finding themselves in physical isolation. With COVID-19, we're all isolated or feeling isolated to some degree, but some of us feel safe in our homes, bunkered down with our lovely family, feeling safe and protected. But what about the women who do not see their home as a sanctuary? The women who on a normal day couldn't wait to get out of the house and away from their abuser? The women whose children are only protected from seeing or hearing abuse whilst they're at school? The women who are now trapped in a house with an abuser with no other support or means of escape? Some people are using COVID-19, this situation, to newly introduce as yet another form of control, suddenly finding they can insist this is the reason the partner can't leave the house or speak to anyone, denying them the support they usually get from others. They have no choice but to stay in. Some people who use violence are using COVID-19 as a form of abuse, telling their partner that they have the virus and therefore their partner cannot leave the house and must stay in with them, feeding into both social and emotional abuse. Another use of COVID-19 is the person who uses violence inviting people into the house where the partner is self-isolating. then saying that the visitor has COVID-19 and that they are going to infect them. And again, this is linking into that emotional abuse. There's a growing financial pressure and other pressures from lack of work, and now the victim will receive no money for essentials, linking into financial abuse. Any threats against a woman or a child should be taken very seriously, and protective measures should be taken, including reporting to the police. So just to finalise this, some people who were in a terrible situation before COVID-19 are now in an even worse situation because they've got the already abusive partner, combined with all the restrictions and movement and fear from COVID-19, ensuring they have very little privacy. Laura.
Okay, thanks, Marion. So to give us some idea, I guess leading on from what Marion was saying, some idea about how the COVID-19 pandemic is impacting domestic and family violence in Australia, we're just going to take a look at some recent statistics. Women's Safety New South Wales is surveying its members who are frontline women's domestic and family violence workers across the state on a weekly basis to map the impact COVID-19 is having on workers and the women, children and families they are supporting. Their latest report, published in April, shows a week-on-week rise in violence directly related to COVID-19 since restrictions commenced, along with an escalation of violence and abuse in many cases. There is also an increasing number of cases where violence has occurred for the first time. This research tallies with reports from other organisations such as Your Toolkit, which is an organisation based in WA, and that reported a significant spike in users on their website in March. I think it's going to take some time, however, for us to fully understand the impact of this pandemic on women and children's safety. And in fact, there is some expectation that demand on domestic and family violence services will increase as restrictions start to lift and provide some women with their first opportunity to flee an unsafe situation. That sort of links us into our final category of the 9 that Marion began speaking about, and that's technology facilitated abuse. And that's used to describe the many ways technology can be used to harass, threaten, monitor, stalk, impersonate, or humiliate another person. Technology facilitated abuse is often an extension of the other forms of abuse Marion spoke about. And if a person is experiencing abuse in any form, it's likely that the person using violence will also use technology facilitated abuse at some point, given how much technology is integrated with our lives. You can see there in a 2015 survey of frontline domestic and family violence workers, 98% of respondents had clients who had experienced stalking and technology facilitated abuse. And they described its use across a range of platforms to abuse, threaten, monitor, or humiliate them. This can take many, many forms. So some women describe relentless and constant calls or texts, and that can be used as a form of harassment or to check up on them and where they are and who they're with. Abusers can demand to know the woman's passwords for social media accounts or online banking, for instance. And once they know that, they can then monitor all activity or even take full control. Abusers can also use tracking and spyware technology to stalk and monitor their victims, placing trackers in their car, installing spyware on their phones or other devices, and even secreting them in children's toys. One final aspect of technology facilitated abuse is image-based abuse, and this was previously known as revenge porn. This occurs when an abuser creates, shares, or threatens to share an intimate video or picture without the consent of the person pictured. While this form of abuse can also take place outside of domestic and family violence relationships, it is a tactic that can and is used to maintain power and control over a victim. It's worth noting that this is a relatively common phenomenon. In 2017, a study by the Office of the E-Safety Commissioner found that 1 in 10 adult Australians has experienced image-based abuse, and 1/5 of us have been bystanders to it. Young women between the ages of 18 and 45 were found to be at the highest risk of being a victim of image-based abuse, as are people who have a disability, members of the LGBTIQ+ community, and Indigenous Australians. So for more information on the subject of technology facilitated abuse, the eSafety Commissioner has a comprehensive website, and it offers information on how to stay safe for the general community, and also e-learning options for people who work with clients on how to help them stay safe. As we mentioned, the restrictions caused by COVID-19 have had a big impact on those being subjected to domestic and family violence. Our technology is now one of our main lifelines, and not being able to use this safely is already having serious repercussions. Monash University recently released information which states that while rates of domestic and family violence are increasing during this time, some help-seeking behaviour, such as calls to helplines, is actually decreasing. And this is thought to be due to the increased likelihood that the person being subjected to violence is being monitored and doesn't feel safe to make a call. Meanwhile, very concerning, Google data has shown a 75% increase in searches around domestic and family violence. So statistics such as these, while not yet giving us the full picture, certainly imply that the social isolation caused by the pandemic, along with our increased dependence on technology, has created a situation for many people where they don't feel safe to reach out. And really, this means that people such as neighbours and other bystanders are especially important during this time. And that's why workshops for both frontline workers and the general community are so important. So in a moment, we're going to go into what we can do as a member of the community if we have someone we're concerned about. But we'll just take a moment, if that's okay, just to pause to see if there's been any questions that have come through while we've been talking.
Great. Thank you, Laura. This is Alison Allari again from Injury Matters. I have had one question through. It was actually in relation to the section on the DV-alert program that you opened up with. So Olivia Stevenson has asked, what were the recommendations that Circa came up with for their evaluation?
Yes, I can speak to that. So some of the recommendations are in how the information is presented, so the use of more visuals. Some of our slides are still quite wordy. What they found was that our local trainers on the ground are also doing a lot of contextualising within the course, so formalising that. They did recommend also that we expand our pool of available Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander trainers, because it was particularly beneficial where trainers had came from that local area. When this program started, we had only one trainer and then two trainers that would fly around the country, and we have really expanded that, but it's going to be continuing to be an area that we're working on.
Great, thank you, Lisa. That was the only other question we did have. I have had someone ask about whether the slides will be available. Oh, sorry, there is one more question. The slides will be available afterwards, and the answer is yes. And we are also recording the session as well, so that will be available for people to listen to afterwards through the No Injury website. But I've just had a question come through from Faye McInnes, who asks, is there a code word for someone can use to alert a worker over the phone? And if there is, how do we get that word out to victims without alerting perpetrators?
I can speak to that one if you like, guys.
Yeah.
That's a really good question, and it's quite a common question that comes up when we hold these workshops. There's no easy or quick answer to something like this. I think what often happens is that perhaps if somebody is in a position to speak to a client, often one of the things is we try to do as a service provider will be to have at least some time where we can speak to that person by themselves and at least start that conversation. And then usually that's an agreement between that worker and that client to say, you know, what would be something that you think you could say that wouldn't alert your abuser to the fact that you're using a code word, and then the worker keeps an ear out for that. So often that's how it is, because to have a blanket one, you have a bit less security. Some organizations will encourage that too, but often it's between a worker and a client at the time, because the best, I guess the best person to be checking about what's safe for them is the client. So that's what often comes out as an answer when we hold these workshops.
Great, thanks, Laura. And we have had another question come through as well from Kirsten Beckingham, who has asked, do you have any stats on whether domestic and family violence has increased in WA? She saw the stats were from New South Wales and was interested to hear if there were stats for WA at the moment.
Again, I can jump on this one if you guys like. I know that statistics around the impact of COVID, because this has all happened so quickly, there aren't an awful lot of statistics as of yet. So I guess that's when we say we don't have a full picture. I think as time goes on, we'll get more of a picture. They did say that there's a bit of variation, so I guess it will depend on the person's circumstances. Within the state of WA, as far as I'm aware, there aren't a lot of statistics coming out as of yet. But one thing we're going to share at the end of the presentation is a link to ANROS, the Australian National Research Organisation for Women's Safety. And they have a mailing list where they send out information on this kind of area. And it's a really good place to keep an eye out for the latest statistics as they come through.
Great, thank you, Laura. That is all the questions we have for now, so I'll pass it back over to you to keep going. Thanks.
All right, thanks very much. So what we're going to look at now is, I guess, what we can do as individuals, because I know that some of us who are attending this workshop are service providers, and perhaps having conversations with people about domestic and family violence is something that you all do. I'm mindful there's other people here who don't have that training, and even when we do this for a living, transferring it to our personal life can be a bit tricky. So we're going to share some tips. So we go into this in more depth in the workshops, but we'll give you some tips for right now, especially given the situation that we're currently living in, which is all a bit different. Because any one of us really can have someone in our lives who is living near us, who's being subjected to domestic and family violence. So some signs that we might notice, particularly as we're all living in our homes at the moment and spending a lot of time in those homes, there is perhaps more of a chance of us overhearing things from maybe neighbours or people in proximity to us. So loud and abusive behaviour. So back to that verbal abuse Marion was talking about. Some signs that that person is walking on eggshells as a result perhaps of some of the other forms of abuse that's happening. So if we have someone who appears nervous around the person that they're living with, or a particular person, unexplained bruising or injuries, obviously, or perhaps attempts to cover that up. And sometimes we can see belittling or bullying behaviour on the part of the person using violence. And that's because while a lot of abuse can remain hidden and behind closed doors, one aspect of this behaviour is to try and humiliate the victim in public. So we might see some behaviour that does sort of show that happening. So there's some, apart from all those signs and categories that Marion pointed out, there are some ones that we might be more likely to see in here right now. And then when we do, we know it can be difficult to know how to check in with someone under these circumstances. So here are some basic tips, essentially. One is wait for a safe time where you won't be overheard. We need to take our cue from the other person here. So if they don't think it's a safe time or place to talk, then it isn't a safe time or place. We can do things at the moment, such as try to invite them over for a coffee or suggest a walk, and those things that aren't too restricted for us at the moment. And then when we do have that person with us, it does seem like it's a safe place to talk, we can start by asking some broad, open questions, which show we've noticed something and that we care. So such as, I notice you're not your usual self lately. How are things with you? Those sort of broad, open questions. And we might need to be very patient here. It might take several conversations. If you're still concerned, you can try asking a more direct question. So things like, is there someone that you are afraid of? or do you feel safe at home? What we need to remember here is that if the person doesn't want to discuss it with you, that's all right. It's important to let them know that you are there if they change their mind. Many people in this situation feel so isolated, and really they are safer straight away if they know there is someone that they can call on. If someone does disclose something like this to you, don't feel like you have to come up with all the answers. Listening to the person and making it clear you take it seriously can be the most valuable thing that you can do. Make it clear that you believe them, that violence or abuse is never justified. Saying something like, everyone has the right to feel safe in their own home, or everyone has the right to live free from violence can be useful. Avoid speaking badly of the person using violence. This can create problems later, as the victim may feel they cannot go to you if they haven't left the relationship. Instead, focus on the fact that they deserve to be safe. We also need to ask her how you can help. There are numbers you can call to get some advice, and Marion will outline those in a moment. Sometimes making that initial call is difficult, so you could offer to do this with the person, and perhaps offer the use of your phone if she feels that hers isn't safe. So important that we don't do anything that places either of you in danger. So please don't do anything that places you in danger either. If you fear for someone's immediate safety, that's when we have to call the police. It's important to get support for yourself also. So you can call 1-800-RESPECT for support and advice. And don't forget, you can call Lifeline at any time to talk about how you yourself are feeling, because these kinds of conversations are so useful and can be so rewarding, but they can also be quite draining. So I'm going to pass over to Marion now, just to have a bit of a talk about some resources that are out there.
Thank you, Laura. Just to reiterate what Laura did say there, you don't need to come up with all the answers. So the first one we're going to look at there is 1-800-RESPECT or 1-800-737-732. So they have many resources on the website, including a safety plan to assist somebody keeping safe, whether they're leaving their abuser or staying with them in the family home. 1-800-RESPECT's highly skilled phone counsellors can work with people in need of help, even offering support whilst the person using violence is still in the house. When we consider the current climate, it's imperative that this can happen. So while there has been a decrease of about 5% in calls from women to 1-800-RESPECT, over the same period there has been an increase of approximately 20% on the 1-800-RESPECT chat line. So you can see on the slide there, we also have Women's Domestic Violence Helpline, which is situated here in WA. It's a 24-hour service, 7 days a week. It provides service support and phone counselling for women experiencing domestic and family violence. Other services offered are information and advice, referral to local advocacy and support services, liaison with police if necessary, and support in escaping situations of family and domestic violence. The service can refer women to safe accommodation if required, and they also have a telephone-based interpreting service if needed. So that number there for the DV helpline is 9223 1188, and there is a free number there as well. There's also Crisis Care Helpline. So this is a telephone information and counselling service for anyone in crisis needing urgent help. It operates 24 hours, sorry about that, my apologies, after hours, 7 days a week. You can also, so crisis care number is 9223 1111. It's just there up on the slide. It can also be accessed through the translating and interpreting service on 13 14 50. Suggestions on when a person may use crisis care could be a person escaping domestic violence and needing help and information. If they're concerned about the well-being of a child for any serious problem, or are homeless or recognise that they are hurting people and want to stop. It's always a good idea to find out what services are available in your area and where possible, contextualise the service to each individual. For example, a person with mobility problems may struggle with public transport over long distance. And as Laura said earlier about our different streams, our different workshops we cover in our training, thinking about specific barriers people would come across. Don't be afraid to dial 000 in an emergency situation. As Laura mentioned, Lifeline are also available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 13, 11, 14. And again, this service is highly skilled call takers who offer support in a time of crisis. Laura.
Okay, thank you. So you will no doubt have noticed that we've focused on women as those subjected to domestic and family violence today, as do our workshops. And while statistically this is far the most common scenario, we recognise that men can and are subjected to domestic and family violence also. A huge message in our workshops is that everyone has the right to live free from violence, regardless of gender. And there are resources out there specifically for men. One of these is Men's Line Australia, which offers telephone or online counselling for men, and they can assist whether the person has been subjected to or is using violence. Another is the Men's Referral Service run by No to Violence. They are useful for a man who is using violence primarily, and it's interesting to note that this service has reported a huge surge in self-referrals from men since the COVID-19 restrictions were put in place. I mean, it's sad news, but it also offers hope that men using violence often do want to stop and can seek out and find assistance. Just to let you know as well, in the next financial year, we'll also be running a pilot workshop through the DV-alert programme on working for men who use violence. This workshop will focus on how a frontline worker can communicate with a man using violence in a way that does not condone the violence, but that also encourages the person to seek help for their behaviour. So watch this space.
Okay, thanks, Laura. So we're now going to talk about some steps for further learning. So I'm going to discuss two streams of delivery. One is e-learning and the other is the equivalent of our face-to-face courses delivered through Zoom. So with the e-learning, and this has been available for some time, and it's great to be able to take advantage of this during the current time. There are two of the streams available, the general workshop and the Working with Women with Disabilities workshop. So how to access these is to go to the DV-alert website, and that's dvalert.org.au. If you click Enroll, which is the orange button at the top right there, you can then select the training that you want to enroll in. So the options there include the e-learning courses. Now, these are the equivalent of the 2-day course and the accredited unit of competency. So you do need to provide your organisation and your job title in the application to ensure that you meet those requirements we looked at before, which essentially is providing direct support, direct frontline support to members of the community. It's a self-paced course designed to be completed over a 6-week duration with several online modules and assessments. I believe there's 13 modules for the general stream. Student support is provided, and yeah, that's available for you to enroll in now. Now, with our face-to-face courses, Lifeline Australia are currently working very hard to convert those programs to web delivery. That has begun with the 2-hour awareness session, and we're looking to be piloting that within the next fortnight or so. And from there, this will expand to further streams in turn. We will also be returning to face-to-face delivery as soon as it's safe to do so and consistent with the broader health and government guidelines. If you would like to stay informed as we progress through this, you can join. We do have a mailing list. We can keep you informed. You can email us at education@lifelinewa.org.au, and our phone number is 9261 4444. And another place to stay informed as well is that DV-alert website. So that's the same portal for enrolling in our face-to-face courses where they are running. So going through that enroll button, you can then filter by state, and you can see within the awareness sessions or within the courses anything that's running at that time. Now, Laura mentioned earlier as well ANROS. So if you'd like to be kept up to date with the latest research in this area, we recommend visiting ANROS or also joining their mailing list. Now, they're currently putting out, I believe it's a weekly email bulletin specifically around COVID and around the most current fact sheets, research reports, and other valuable resources for people working within organisations and the public. Okay, so that is, it's now time for any further questions.
Great, thank you, Lisa. That was really insightful. We have had a couple of questions come through. So I have a question from one of my colleagues at Injury Matters who has asked, is there anything that we can do to address someone that you think is an abuser, or would that just put the victim more at risk?
That's, yeah, look, that's a really good question. So coming back to, you do need to be very cautious of anything that could put the person in further danger. And yeah, so certainly there would be a great deal of caution needed to exercise in that area. Laura, I'm wondering if you could expand a little bit on that as well.
Yeah, I think that's very I mean, not to give not as a cop out to that question, because it's an excellent question. It does depend on the circumstances and our relationship with that person that we think is the abuser. So that pilot that we talked about running in the next financial year, that deals very specifically with having conversations with someone around their use of violence. So if, I guess, some tips and tricks might be, even if we don't feel it's safe at the moment to address that with the person, because maybe the best person to go to is the person being abused, to see what we can do to help them in the first instance. If we are having a conversation, we can do subtle things such as, it's quite common if we're talking to someone who is using abuse, that they may say things about, say, their partner or the person they're abusing that are quite belittling or almost dehumanizing that person. And so there's little things that we can do to encourage that person to stop doing that. So that might be things like, consistently using the victim's name and asking what they think about certain things. But really our first priority has to be safety. So if we're in a position where there's a way for us to speak to the person using violence, to the person who's experiencing violence, that's probably the safest way to start. And if not, then if we have to wait for that person, the person using violence, to give us some indication that they're ready to talk about it. Because what we have learned is that confronting someone who's using violence about their abuse will escalate the situation. And it may be that as a result of us confronting them, we might not have any consequences, but the person who's being abused may pay the price of that. So really, really need to proceed with caution.
Yeah, okay. Great. Thanks, Laura. We do have a couple more questions. I have a question from Kit Scott, who's asked, I think you've touched on this a little bit, but what's being done with the DV-alert course to address violence and abuse perpetrated by women to children, boys, girls and men? The current DV-alert is heavily weighted with DP perpetrated by men to women and children, whereas we know it's a human issue.
Yes, so as we mentioned at the top of our presentation, this is specifically funded under the National Plan to Reduce Violence Against Women and Their Children. And statistically, we do know that they are the people that experience the most violence, and that's why this program has been funded for that area. We also know, though, and we do emphasise in our course, that it is a human right for every single person to live free from violence, and our intention is never to invalidate the experiences of any person experiencing violence, and that could include a man experiencing violence from a woman. So what we then advise, though, is that the principles and what we do look at in the course can be applied to help anyone. So where we're saying, you know, listen, validate, consider safety, all of those principles are the same. And if we look at those key things that we need to do, you can then use your knowledge, your professional judgment to then adapt that conversation for the person that you're working with in what you know is going to connect with them based on who they are as an individual.
Great, thank you, Lisa. I also have another question by Kit Scott, who has asked, they're curious as to what's being done to help perpetrators of abuse and violence to heal and rehabilitate their violent and abusive behaviours here in WA.
I can speak briefly to that. It's definitely not my my area. I don't work in that area, but I have worked with men who have experienced violence. Men's behaviour change programs would probably be one of the areas. Communicare, a place to start if you're wondering would be something like Breathing Space, which is a program run by Communicare. But I know that other organisations out there, such as Anglicare and Relationships Australia, do run programs or have face-to-face counselling for men that are using violence. So there is help out there. I would say it's thin on the ground, as are all services in relation to domestic and family violence. So that would be a place to start in terms of looking. Stopping family violence, I believe those 3 words is the name of a peak body that's here in WA that focus on men's behaviour change programs and things like that. So stopping family violence would be another place to start if you're interested in looking at that.
Great. Thank you so much, Laura. That is the end of the questions. Did you have anything else you wanted to oh, sorry, I've just had one more come through then. I've had a question from Michelle Bullen, who's asked, do you know of any resources to get some tips on how to speak with victims when on the phone to get them to open up about their previous DV?
So I'm just pondering that question. Would that be in respect of, I guess, a lot of the things that we said around approaching the conversation, but also being very mindful of, you know, perhaps asking the person a question like, is it okay to talk right now? Do you feel comfortable to talk, or is it safe to talk? Not knowing, you know, whether then the person who uses abuse might be in the home or could be you know, listening in. So asking a question that the person can answer in a yes or no manner, whether it is safe to talk. I know when we have trained volunteer telephone crisis supporters to kind of, it's really in starting to pick up some of those elements of power and control, and perhaps asking some open questions around that, and then linking that to what you've noticed. Open questions are always good. You know, perhaps if there's something that you've noticed, outlining that, and then asking an open question and seeing what the person says. Laura, anything further to expand on that?
You read my mind. Yeah, I was just about to say one is depending on what your role is. So we also want to be quite trauma informed and mindful of that. So if there's a reason we need to know about the past abuse, is it enough in our role to know that has happened? How much do we need to know in terms of specifics? So if that's not our role and we're not a counsellor, we need to be quite mindful that we don't ask the person to dig into too much of that past violence, or even the current violence, but certainly in the past, because we may not be trained as professionals in order to know what to do when that's happening. So for the safety of the person, those good open questions, asking about what's happened, being patient, it may take a while for the person to speak about it, but not digging for information unless we are trained as somebody who can help someone who's experienced trauma. So that will be another thing to remember if we're asking someone to open up about this stuff.
Great, thank you. Okay, I think this time that is all of the questions. So I just wanted to say a big thank you to Casey, Marion, Lisa and Laura for sharing your knowledge, your wealth of knowledge and experience with us today, and, you know, taking the time, I guess, to teach us about something that's more relevant than ever during these difficult times as well. So I will,
Sorry, I was just thank you so much, and thank you so much for inviting us to deliver this as well. I just had the thought too to add, just again, a reminder for anybody, for any reason, you know, related to anything we've talked about today, or through what you're experiencing with the current situation, to remind everybody listening that you can always call Lifeline as well, because many people will feel you know, perhaps that Lifeline is only for someone who may be having thoughts of suicide, but we're here for anybody in crisis, for any reason, at any time. If you'd like to talk to someone, you can reach us on 13 11 14 24/7. There's also online chat available for some certain hours in the evening that you can see that on the Lifeline website. You can find out how to access that. And there's also a trial of text messaging happening as well, different ways that we can connect. We have seen, in our service, we have seen a huge uplift in the amount of calls coming through. So I'm not sure if we've got the figures for April yet, but March was the busiest month that we'd ever had across Australia. But we also, our highly trained volunteers are really matching that demand. They are doing additional hours on the phones with their availability. So yeah, we're there to answer your calls for anyone who may need us at any time, your clients and yourselves.
great. Thank you, Lisa. I will just take the presenter mode back off you 1 minute. Sorry, 1 second. My computer's freezing, always the way.
Always happens right when you need it.
Oh, it definitely does. You can never really rely on tech, can you? Great. So I think it's really important today to keep the conversation going about domestic and family violence, and a couple of next steps from Injury Matters. We do have a few resources that are available. These are all available through the No Injury website, which is just noinjury.org.au. We got a violence resource kit, a fact sheet, as well as an information sheet which provides a bit more of a summary of some of the services that are available in Western Australia. We have a few more trainings which we have coming up over the next month. So next week we have the domestic and family violence in culturally and linguistically diverse communities. That one is being delivered by Elizabeth Lang, who also delivers the culturally diverse program for Lifeline, I believe. They mentioned her briefly at the start of the session. So she's going to be doing this training for us and providing a bit of an overview. We're also going to be looking at hospitalised sports injuries in Australia, and then a totally different area of injury. We're going to be looking at vision and falls as part of our Stay on Your Feet program, as well as mild cognitive impairment and falls prevention for older adults. Just a few more next steps for those interested. Oh, sorry, let me go back 1 second. So if you'd like to keep the conversation going from today, we do have an injury prevention network that meets quarterly to provide practitioners across Western Australia with an opportunity to connect with each other and to share learnings and solutions to injury prevention. community safety, as well as that recovery as well. We also have our Connected program, which provides you with the opportunity to build your professional network and as well as keeping engaged in today's conversation. So Connected, you are as a networking program, you're randomly paired bi-monthly with another person to have a 15-minute conversation, and that's with another professional working in the injury prevention space. Also, evaluation. I will send out a follow-up email today, which will have a link for an evaluation. So if you could just take the time to fill that out and provide any feedback on today's training. It just helps ensure that we're delivering webinars and educational trainings that are relevant and meeting your professional needs as well. So if you are big on the social media front, encourage you to follow us on Twitter or tag us as well. We have a monthly e-news that goes out as well if you're interested in keeping in the loop. So once again, thanks Casey, Marion, Lisa and Laura for taking the time today to present and share your knowledge. And like I said, it's more relevant than ever at the moment. And I know I will be definitely signing up to some further DV-alert training, and I think it's important to have the confidence and know how to engage in what can be a difficult conversation sometimes. So thank you all once again, and enjoy the rest of your day. That's it for today. Thank you.